Welcome back to episode 4 of the International Web Effectiveness Podcast, where Bill Hunt and I, Bill Scully, focus on the strategies and techniques necessary for ensuring your web presence effectively serves your internal stakeholders and global customers. In our last episode, we discussed the value of web governance, which can scare some people because it sounds so strict and maybe creates loss of flexibility. However, as we explored, governance is really about having guidelines to streamline processes, to reduce errors, and make things more scalable. This week, we're going to discuss the value and our expertise with Web Centers of Excellence, also known as COEs. Some people might call them Centers of Experience. Before we do that, we've got some news this week. I noticed that Gary mentioned on the Google SEO Office Hours podcast, and I'm paraphrasing here, generally speaking, a CCTLD will tend to have a little more benefit due to its location to the user. I would sure that's true, but again, this goes back to our last rant. Things can be taken out of context or is not complete. My first thought is it any different than implementing hreflang? What are your thoughts on that, Bill?
I think anybody who hasn't listened to last week's or the second episode should definitely take a listen. I think it's not much difference. And what I really want to caution people, which always happens whenever this soundbite comes out, is people, putting in proposals to rip out, their global TLD, their .com folder website and replace it because Gary said something works better. And just as like we said before, I think, anything can work if it's done correctly. And so to your point, if you're not using CCTLDs, you can use hreflang. When used correctly, it's on par. And Gary did, if you read the article, Gary does make that statement. And then he goes on to say in like the call out, I think 2 call outs below that it's all about language. Right? Making sure it's about the language because the query is in the language. And so, while it is a strong signal as CCTLD that it is for Germany, or in the example he gave, it was explicit to Korea, would a Korean site outrank or perform better when it's got a Korean CCTLD than not? So at the end of the day, if 2 things are equal, then obviously that it's explicitly for Korea. So Google's, as he said, will give it a slight boost. But if your answer is better, if your content is better, and you're using, hreflang, even if it's on a .com, it helps you. You want to be on par with something else. So yeah, please don't go out and start ripping out the guts of your website just because that, and as we talked about last week, the great research from the GA agency that while supported the same answer, did have enough nuances that your mileage may vary based on your market. So again, think about it. Does it make sense? If you can do top level domains, then awesome, go for it.
And rankings doesn't equal revenue. If you're doing all this work, you may end up spending all the benefits that you get. Okay, but honestly, it was nice to hear something from Google on that. So that was topical. There has been a few big posts lately on the subject. Good to get some information straight from the horse's mouth. In this episode, we're going to get into the concept of Web COEs, also known as Center of Excellence or Expertise. We're going to discuss our experiences and their impact on business and touch on how to establish one. I've got a lot of experience in this. I represented search in the Siemens corporate COE when that was first created. And then I was hired by a competitor as the director of COE digital marketing. And my first task was actually to build one from scratch. But Bill, you have experience consulting with dozens of different COEs. What are your thoughts on building and running a web marketing COE?
I think they're critical, especially if you've got a global organization. Even if you got a small one, a center of excellence is exactly like that. It's really the idea we want to do is we want to think of it as a way to lower costs, increase effectiveness, get people on board. One of the things you talked about in the last episode around having subject matter experts. And even if you don't put a fancy label on it, it's just getting people from the different disciplines together and having them think about these things. How do we collaborate, and how do we get synergies? How do we, when we deploy something, how do we make sure that it's search friendly? Because, and we see these a lot, like we've called them search center of excellence. Pretty much every multinational I've ever worked with, that was one of the first things that we would do, or we do it in parallel with the search program. And I could tell you that everyone that did this to any degree, even if it was nothing more than the occasional lunch and learn, could point to that being a major contributor to performance improvement. So definitely, it's totally worth the time investment in doing it. And I guess step one, have a lunch and learn with the different constituencies and say, hey, I'm so and so, and hey, this is how, we all come together on the web, and then iterate from there.
Yeah. Yeah, so the way I approached it, I was trying to put together a team, and it was web, it was not just search, but we wanted to centralize all the knowledge, the resources, best practices. But after we identified the team, the first thing was really to define the vision and the objectives of the team. You know, just throw some numbers out there so that you can benchmark yourself and share that information with the senior managers. It might be, a simple thing like increase traffic by 20%, or it could be as detailed, even though you might not have e-commerce, about what you contribute as far as calculating your contribution to revenue. The team that I worked with, we didn't hire anybody. We basically plucked people out, and it wasn't a department as much as it was a team, but they had to guarantee a certain percentage of their time. We had web developers, content strategists. I was the SEO expert, and project managers. And, the goal was really to first tackle the problems that people had in the regions. And it's amazing when you put this team together and people understand what you do, where before they didn't know what you did, and now understand what information you need to do your job, how quickly things get solved.
Yeah. I think that's key. I mean, the people not understanding how what they do can it impact positively or negatively somebody else, right? That
Yeah.
that little things like, hey, we didn't realize that when we put in this widget that it was going to slow our website down by 50%, and then that could negatively impact both, the customer satisfaction numbers because they're complaining it's too slow, or things like, page speed in terms of Google, potentially demoting us because it takes too long to load. And I think that awareness of how each person contributes to the website or to the ecosystem, I think is really important. That's also the interesting thing, is how little people are aware of what they do
Yeah.
may impact somebody downstream. Redirects is another one that I always find people fascinated with. We've got content people changing content all day long, merging it, purging it, doing whatever, not realizing that when they take it away, they're losing precious search equity.
Hmm.
Or the content may have been ranking for something, and then we take away those rankings. Or they may not realize that a certain set of pages, drive leads or revenue. Or even one, when we talk about paid search, that the offer that the brand or the team thinks is cool is downloading a white paper in a context that somebody wants to solve a problem.
Hmm.
These mismatch. Other ones that I find fascinated with this when they first are part of it is PR. Not knowing that if they put out a press release, that the links they have in it, when the press release is copied and pasted across media sites, that those links are like gold.
Yeah.
And then when you say, hey, we can actually tell you the traffic you drove from your links, they're like, what? I got some way to verify my existence from a traffic or revenue contribution. So I think that people get really excited. Some people get depressed when they realize that they have a negative impact on what somebody else does. But I think fostering that discussion is critical to the overall performance.
Yeah. And when you're all working towards a common goal, you make smart decisions like, should we really be bidding on these keywords? We're already ranking number one. Can you use that money somewhere else where we're having a really hard time ranking until we can boost that? Things like centralizing resources and tools, standardizing on analytics, on SEO tools, streamlining processes to reduce costs. I think those are all great ways to benefit and save money. But there's this other whole side of this, the sharing and implementing best practices. I think you've got a lot of experience in that. You want to share some?
Yeah, I mean, I've tell people, even if you go to a conference, take your notes, the highlights, and then share them with the audience. So again, whether you have a formal structure or not, just putting people, in a Slack channel or an email chain or, wherever, however you communicate inside of Teams, just make that information available to people, explaining and documenting things, right? And I'm a fan of what I've always referred to as corporate judo, where, don't create a separate SEO guide or a separate PR guide. Get it into something that's more mainstream within the organization. Brand standards. You want to impact a change from a search perspective, get that put into a brand guideline, that
Yeah.
mandates certain things, because those are monitored. There's tools that will check for that stuff. And so the more of that you can get, again, I think because our lens here in this podcast is global. And I think a lot of times just sharing this, not just across teams, but across, your SEO team, because there might be somebody that it's 1/10 of their month can be spent on anything SEO. So they don't have time
Yeah.
thinking about it. They don't have time doing this. They might be managing a paid agency where they just like, here, take this, do it. Any of this knowledge, may trigger something for them. It may trigger that, hey, in 3 markets, we're launching a new website that's heavy JavaScript, and that may have an impact on us when we launch. And hey, oh, by the way, I saw this really cool guide, that somebody, there's a link to it from this guy at Google, with multicolor hair, that's talking about, how do they process JavaScript and recommendations for our website and pass that off to the developers. That's the power of sharing this information. And again, we're trying to stay away from it being restrictive and that, but more it's trying to make it, complementary and educational and assistive, where they can use it to learn and just be aware. And so when something is said, it triggers this response. Oh, we have a guide for that. Let me go check that out and see if we're following the guide that we created.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is it elevates the work you do to the point where it's revenue generating and it gets executive support. I think more people look at it as, I can benefit from this group because they're basically supporting my goals. And it eliminates all of those separate goals. Like, we need to get something done to rank, and the IT guys are like, we need to stop building stuff to reduce costs. When you have a common goal, you can set those priorities.
Right. And I think you mentioned something earlier about everybody gets to tell someone, introduce their KPIs or their goals.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting. So, I mean, just like you were just talking about, right? The guys on the web dev and infrastructure side, they may have a mandate to reduce server requests. And so they're doing things like they're blocking parts of the web. And, like now with all the bots and everything that's crawling, people are really starting to ratchet down security. And we saw this with href lang builder. We started to notice a pattern, so much so that we had to write a new feature really for our side when we were getting 403 or denied access by bots, even requesting XML sitemaps. And I think we were up to probably 60% of the clients where we were fetching sitemaps were getting blocked, and we had to be put on the allow list. And as we tracked this back, it was all these companies trying to prevent and minimize the increased cost of bot traffic. And
Yeah.
we just look like any other bot requesting an XML, which is an easy way to find all the pages. So we, we found this when we started going to clients, said, hey, if your team is thinking about reducing bot traffic, then make sure that we're on the allow list. So again, if they'd have said in this wider forum, we're doing this, that should have triggered something for the SEO or anybody else. And I think the other one too is think about how you can contribute to that KPI. Again, they got to reduce traffic, server calls. So one way we can do that is maybe improve our robots text to keep Google and other spiders that, recognize robots text out of things they don't need to be in. Right. So
Yeah.
again, that's a mutual thing. The other one would be, if somebody says like an ECRM or lead gen says, hey, we need to get, 4 million new leads into the hopper. If you're the search person, and you talk to the analytics, say, hey, where are people coming in? Where are we getting the most people going into our lead queue? Well, it's this kind of thing. I'll give you an example from a drink recipe site. We saw that the most people going into ECRM tended to be people which we call drink curious. They were looking for drinks with, so flavors like with lemon or coffee. And so, great. How are we doing on those phrases? And can we create more of them? And can we rank more and work with creative to create more? And so we just, by reverse engineering what's putting people in the lead queue today, and we can look at where we're underperforming from a search perspective, ask the content team if they can prioritize this type of content. So again, it's bi-directional. Let me help you with your goals, and that maybe if you understood my goals, something you're doing in your ecosystem or your food chain would be able to benefit me.
Yeah. Yeah. And, my experience on both teams, most of the people knew each other because they were the most vocal or had the most to gain. But, we had some people coming in, kicking and screaming, PR. But we ended up becoming like a really tight group, lifelong friends. Lots of hard decisions, hard work. We didn't assign, specific tasks. This was more of an executive team that puts together the vision and the strategy and makes decisions, works to put together to roll up the global costs for web and, identify gaps where you probably wouldn't be able to fill them if you did it at like just a corporate level or a regional level.
And I think the communication, right? That's the thing. And like you mentioned, people that were drug into this kicking and screaming, they got to see value from it. And I think that's why people don't want to come to meetings. And you'll know that, you've sort of lost the audience when you start to see some of the senior people drop out of your update and performance meetings. Like if you're an agency owner and some of the key people stop coming, that means you're not adding any value to them.
Hmm.
So like the PR folks, like we said, PR, we needed them. And that's why we said, hey, can we give you some data that helps show that what you do is doing great things? And so whatever it takes to get people on board, because people are busy and they don't want yet another meeting that's not going to add value. And I like how you phrased it with, you're making decisions. And, that's the other thing is making decisions, in a concerted effort that, okay, I'm going to have to give and take. I might have to give up this and you give up that. But now we have context as to why.
Yeah.
Why, rather than down the road coming back and say, oh, you launched this and it killed me. And now I've got 500 hours of stuff. Many times if people knew up front, they could do it. So again, it sounds like, as we alluded to, the center of excellence is really just a good communication pathway for people across the different disciplines where each person understands more, gets more out of it, and can collaborate with other folks. And in a worst case, I think one note that I want to make sure we talked about was they can be the arbiter between choices. Like you said, they have to make the hard choices sometimes.
Yeah.
And maybe this group ends up being like an arbitration group that maybe there's down at a level below or between markets, there's a bunch of battles going on. It gets escalated
Yeah.
into this group. And yeah, it's another way to solve problems.
Yeah, one example of that was there was a division that wanted to get into marketing automation, and we already had that on the roadmap. And had we not had the tight community outreach, we wouldn't have known that they were going for that. And we were able to convince them, well, you won't have to pay for this if you wait 6 months. And really what we want to do long term is have, one marketing automation system so that we could tie that into all our reporting. So that would have never happened had we had the group together and the communications back and forth. All right.
And I think that's probably one of, if we list a couple benefits, because now we've talked about the virtues of this. So the benefits would be, to me, is reducing that frustration and disorganization by people adopting sort of that collaborative viewpoint. I think second is people understand, how they're contributing to this ecosystem. Like the example, hey, we're already got marketing automation on the roadmap. It's not all necessarily about cost reduction, but increased efficiency. If we already have something that somebody else is using, if somebody already else has a task and you can bolt onto it. Tools is another great one. I just was talking to an agency that said all the markets, their international arms of this agency, most didn't really have the budget. They were talking about hreflang, and they didn't have a way to do any cannibalization monitoring. And I just suggested, well, if you have a bigger account budget, then maybe you can run some reports within your allowance for them, at least some of the key markets. And, and then the account director on the call is like, dude, are you on crack? Because, that's our budget. We'll never share that with another region or market. But, once they thought about it, it's like, hey, it's going to help us if we can show, especially if they're if they're not the beneficiary of cannibalization. And sure enough, they were using a advanced web ranking, and they had an API where they were pulling in the data. And he said it took their analysts like 15 minutes to create some of these brand family reports that they could share.
Yeah.
And then the other offices were like, oh my God, this is amazing. Unfortunately, it did open the floodgates to say, can you run this report? Can you do this report? But at least they were giving them reports that they could all mutually action on the benefit of the client, just by somebody, saying, hey, let's think about a different way to do this.
Yeah. And one other thing that I think worked really well was we were the scouts. So we would get corporate seed money to try things. And if that worked out, then we could, try and get it from corporate, or maybe we could try and cobble together bits of budgets from other markets, other divisions, to implement some of the tools and the techniques. But I think that's good. So let's wrap up this part of the discussion. I think, some of the things that are really important is have the right people on the team, people that contribute and make decisions and are good communicators to their stakeholders. Every person should have their own list of stakeholders, and those stakeholders should have their own list of people to communicate with. I think it's really important to get the word out about what you're doing and really get into the other meetings if you can. Get into marketing, executive marketing meetings, executive sales meetings, present what you're doing, get feedback on the results that they're seeing, and making sure that you're putting together lunch and learns and sharing best practices with everybody that you can think of. Any other thoughts on that?
No, you nailed it. I think that's it. Start somewhere. Like we've said in all of these, start somewhere. Start with sending the first email and sharing something you've read, that you vetted, put your opinion on it, and start sharing it with a wider audience. And yeah, even if it's just starting with another area and starting with them and then branch out. But yeah, everything you listed is exactly, that's where you start and iterate from there.
Okay, great. I want to remind people that we have a free Facebook group, and we'll have a link to it in the notes. Please join and contribute to this conversation. You can ask us any questions. We'll be there to answer them, and we look forward to any type of feedback you have. Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying hreflang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there.
So next time, we want to go into one step further from this, where we start talking about the idea of some of the root causes of why things fail. So we're going to sort of things that you can bring to your center of excellence, or things you can have governance, but talking about a couple different things, patterns that we see. We've identified 4 key areas that result in projects failing. And the last one, believe it or not, is the lack of any kind of measurement or monitoring. So we're still on task with the way we've been flowing these. So look forward to next time. And yeah, we'll talk about why things fail.
Looking forward to it. See you then, Bill.
See you.
Bye. Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying Href Lang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there.